But it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. And that goes for fake news, for foreign interference in elections and hate speech, as well as developers and data privacy. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake.
Well, for more on this, Nandini Jami joins us now from Washington, D.C. She's the co-founder of the corporate activist group Sleeping Giants and Check My Ads. She's also an expert in brand safety and digital advertising. And Stefan Lurker is the CEO of the World Federation of Advertisers and is a member of Advertising Week's Global Advisory Council, and he joins us from Brussels. Welcome to you both. Stefan, if I could start with you first. Your organisation, the World Federation of Advertisers, negotiated this deal with Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. Can you explain to us just how this agreement will work to help stop the spread of misinformation, hate speech on these platforms?
Yes, I'd like to be very candid in terms of what this initial first step in our collaboration with platforms means. This is not directly related to the boycott. Nandini will be talking about the US civil rights organization's boycott, which took place last July. We're not related to that movement. We've been working with platforms for the last 15 months in the context of a cross-industry initiative in order to be addressing the proliferation of hate speech and harmful content. We, as brand owners, realize that we have a responsibility which goes beyond making sure that our ad spend is effective and efficient. We have a responsibility in making sure that where we place our ads, we do that in a manner that is sustainable for society and that is respectful of society, and that it reflects also the values of the companies those ads are being purchased for. So this work, which was announced today in terms of initial agreement, has been going on for the last 15 months, and it is really structured around 4 key items, which seek to put in place a model and a mechanism that makes it possible across the industry to be placing ads in a respectful manner on platforms. There are 4 strands to that agreement. One is we have an agreement by platforms to operate according to consistent definitions of what harmful content and hate speech is all about. Today, you have platforms which have their own definitions, and those definitions are very difficult to manage from a brand owner perspective because they're not consistent. So in order to make platforms accountable to brand owners, you need consistent definitions, and we have agreement on that. Secondly, we're announcing that we will be working on methodologies in order to measure occurrences and prevalence of harmful content on platforms. Again, today, those methodologies vary from platform to platform, and we think we need a consistent way of measuring that in order to be able to hold platforms to account. Thirdly, we're announcing that we're working to a work plan which will allow us to have third-party auditing of the prevalence and occurrences of harmful content and hate speech. Today, we're relying on self-reported data, and we think that is not good enough to be creating the level of trust and confidence in the industry and among society. Now, and fourth, we want tools.
I'm sorry, Stefan, if I can just interrupt, because I know we're running out of time. But Nandini, we last spoke in July when your call for advertisers to boycott Facebook gained a lot of traction. Some of the world's biggest corporations actually heeded your call and withheld their advertising spend on that platform. How confident are you that the deal that's been struck between these platforms and the World Federation of Advertisers will actually result in curbing the spread of hate speech on their sites?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this news today is is more of a wish list than a real policy. I appreciate that the World Federation has come up with a set of definitions of what hate speech is, which is great and it's a step forward. But it's also 2020 and it's been years that we've known of this problem. And I think we need to be a little bit further along by now. We already know what disinformation and hate is. And unfortunately, what this news will not do is actually provide any kind of enforcement or consequences. So, Facebook, while it may adopt these definitions, it won't be taking down any of the hateful or harmful content. And that's what we really need right now.
Yeah, and Stefan, I just want to follow up on that point because, as Nandini said, advertisers have for years been calling on these sites to act on harmful content. The main concern was that their ads were appearing alongside some of these harmful posts. Is there technically a way around this whereby these sites such as Facebook could promise to ensure that the ads don't appear alongside hateful posts and still be in compliance with the deal that you've agreed on?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important to understand what this deal is about. This deal is about making sure that we don't monetize on platforms content that doesn't meet the floor as well as the safety standards which we're applying. And therefore, I want to be very clear. Brand owners are not substituting themselves to regulators in terms of taking enforcement action against the presence of harmful content and hate speech. What we do is we create a mechanism which will operate across the industry and which allows us to be much more effective and by scaling it through the entire industry to be much more effective in holding platforms to account on the placement of ads against content. That's what it's about. So it's basically demonetizing that type of harmful content.
Okay, which will hopefully lead to, I guess, a disincentive for these sites to allow harmful content. But Nandini, this is ultimately, as we know, a voluntary agreement, and the track record for self-regulation and voluntary action when it comes to any sort of harmful content or discrimination or any sorts of negative behaviour isn't the best, to say the least. Do you think that, to Stefan's point, governments perhaps should be looking at regulating this space, that it's actually the role of governments to ensure that companies like Facebook, I guess, crack down on hate speech and misinformation?
You know, I think that really is up to the individual governments. I know that in the EU, there's been a lot more political will to be providing some kind of a regulation or guidance. In the US, that's a lot less likely. I think what the WFA is providing is sort of the closest thing that we have to governance, and I think that's a good thing. And I think that's the only real sort of enforcement that we have right now. So I'll take that.
Okay, now, Stefan, we know that the all-important US presidential election is coming up in November, and we know by now that social media posts play a huge part in swaying voters, and we also know that a lot of those posts contain fake news, misinformation, and even hate speech, which could ultimately sway the outcome of an election. You're saying that this new deal will only be implemented in the second half of 2021. Why not now, before this all-important presidential vote?
No, so let's be clear. The standards are going to be applying now. The tools, what we call the adjacency tools, those tools which will help us operate across the industry in order to make sure that brand owners individually can make choices in terms of where they put their ads, need to be built. It's a very significant effort. Some platforms are further down the path than others. And so we are working to very tight timelines, and we hope to be there sometime in 2021. But I'm afraid that's a technical implementation constraint, which leads to that date of implementation. What I can tell you is that from the conversation we're having with brand owners is that there is a huge awareness and sensitivity to the context in which brands are going to be seen in the run-up to the U.S. elections, and many brands will be extremely careful not to be placed where they feel they would be in contradiction with their values. So whatever the sort of industry-wide tools which we're working on, a lot of companies are taking preventive measures in order to be making sure that they don't end up unintentionally on content that contradicts their values.
And Nandini, the main focus of your June-July advertising boycott was, of course, Facebook. And in the meantime, Facebook really has, I guess, been scared into action. Are you happy with how Facebook has responded to your campaign so far?
No, absolutely not. They're not doing nearly enough. I still see white nationalist groups, hate groups, and still it seems that it's up to the journalists and the activists and folks on Twitter, just ordinary folks, to call these things out. I want to see Facebook investing real money in content moderation, in trust and safety. And as of now, content moderation is one of their smallest line items. I want to see it become one of their biggest line items and one of their biggest expenses. That is the only way to keep us all safe as a society.
Okay, Nandini Jami from Sleeping Giants in Washington, and Steven Lorca, CEO of the World Federation of Advertisers. Thank you again for joining us on the program.